Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast. My name is Scott.
My name's Brian.
No. We're not doing that.
Come on, Reggie and Ara and Jose pulled it off and were very happy with themselves at the Unity Sunday.
Happiest people there, I think. Yeah.
They thought that was really funny.
You too cool to play games with us, Brian?
No, is that a game?
Yeah, it was some kind of game. It's the.
You trying to peer pressure me into pretending?
No. I just was genuinely interested in whether you're too cool to play games with us.
I just hear, Brian, you should do this. That's all I hear coming out of here. Brian, say you're me.
I was trying to peer pressure you. I admit it.
Oh, Brian, gosh. Scott, and Matt back on the podcast together.
Back,
I can
baby.
already tell.
For the first, maybe we'll have Adam lay a little bit of the boys are back in town, back over this.
We probably have to pay for that.
Is this a contest for how much I can cringe in the first minute of the podcast?
We're working on it.
It's working. Yeah.
We're working on it. We were just having this conversation about the fact that I don't invite you guys onto the podcast anymore.
It's been a while.
But that's not the problem. It's that you won't. You're unwilling. You're too busy.
Is that what it is? I guess we've said no a few times. That's probably a factor because of scheduling conflicts.
Okay, so actually, there's more to this, and we should actually. Okay.
Scott's verbally processing on the podcast now.
Looking back,
2 minutes in.
I know.
Looking back, it's been a really long time.
How long?
We really should make. I should make more of an effort to make sure that we can get together in this way, because we've been doing the History of Cornerstone podcasts with Jim, which are incredible. I can't wait for everybody to hear the next one. It's been it'll probably come out after this, but it's been recorded and it's really good.
Does it get dark?
Jim handles difficult seasons, even that he went through, with a care and deftness. I think deftness is unparalleled to anyone. He's
a marvel. He's a marvel.
But we've also been doing some partner updates, right? We talked with Claris, we talked about Iran, we talked about we got updates from the church plants. We had a university ministries update. We did some follow-ups from the Manhood Womanhood Conference in the spring. I'm still going back looking for the last time the three of us were together. I think it was the last time we did a core value, and it was published on September 21st.
Wow.
We were together for the Iran update, though, right? But Ara was here.
It was the three of us.
That's the one the three of us were here.
That's right.
But it was mainly just asking him to talk, right?
Yeah,
so it wasn't like us contributing a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
But September, huh?
September.
That's 6 months. 6 months?
Wow.
Let me do the math. October, November,
You
December,
can't see this at home,
January.
but he's got his fingers. He's counting
five
on
months.
his fingers.
5 months. They tell you in
That's really
school
good.
that you really can't do that forever. But I'm 40, almost 42, still doing it.
I'm going to be honest. When I was
Still doing
writing a Valentine's Day card for Nicole, I was counting how many Valentine's days we've spent together, even before marriage and dating. And I had to use my fingers because it was...
What was the number?
The number was 19.
So you use toes too?
Once I got to 10, I banked it. So I was able to keep it.
Do you guys
in mind that I
know
was
the
in
multiple
teens.
of 9? The multiple of 9 finger trick?
Yes.
I still use that to this day. If I'm like, what's 9 times anything? I still use. Do you know this trick?
Yeah, you move one finger.
Yeah, so if it's 9 times 8, you put your 8th finger down.
Yeah, we really.
And
need,
then it's 7 plus 2.
This is audio. Just
not 7 plus 2, but 72.
Yeah.
Anyways,
it's just people can't see what you're doing. But yes, he's doing it for Brian.
I still use it.
Do you really?
I was teaching my kids it the other day. I'm like, you're gonna use this.
You know that,
and it's okay.
You know that the digits all add up to equal 9. Also,
that's also true.
Yeah,
I think that's why it works. since you have 10 fingers and you're putting one down?
Numbers are magical. That's what we're talking about today. Actually, we're talking
the
about
beauty of abstract math.
we're talking about how numbers, their existence and their function is a proof for God.
Platonic ideal.
Yeah. Anyways, that's not what we're talking about.
Well, wait, it's the day after Valentine's Day. And so now we're talking about the Platonic ideal? Is that like the opposite of the romantic ideal?
Oh, man.
I don't know where that came from, actually. That
Platonic?
makes me curious. Well, I know what Platonic is in terms of like...
It's like Plato.
No. It means not romantic. No, it means not romantic, Matt. I know this.
Yeah, no, he doesn't know about philosophy. I'm just trying to school
like
him.
a platonic friendship.
No,
Exactly.
not like the construction toy for kids.
Not Play-Doh?
Not Play-Doh. Play-Doh. He was a dude. Don't worry about it. You should read about him. Gosh, you're the smart one.
I'll catch up, man. I'll get there.
He hasn't gotten all the way back. He's still caught up on the church fathers, and he hasn't gotten back to Plato yet.
Yeah. That's what it is.
He's working his way backwards.
Yeah.
Almost there.
You'll get there one day.
So the checking the timestamp. Yes, we can move on.
Okay.
Jeez.
Or we should move on.
Maybe this is why we haven't done one since September.
Yeah.
Can we make sure that we do it in the amount of time that someone can just push that 30-second forward, like a certain amount of times, and just know?
Just know that if they push it,
it's as bad as an advertisement for hair loss or something, whatever. On
Why are you looking at me, man?
Just forward.
I can't look at him.
Oh, you can.
I mean, I could, but I'm not. And there's no mirrors, so.
For the record, since September 21st, I have not gotten a single email that said, "Why isn't there more Matt on the podcast?"
That's shocking. I'm shocked. It's why? It's because they all come to me. I get all the emails. Why aren't you on the podcast more?
Yeah.
I have a whole file.
All right. So today's topic is the last time it was just the three of us on the podcast. We were talking about one of our core values, and we are revisiting that topic of our core values today in order to talk about the core value of being people. Oh, nope.
Can't do it that way.
No.
The core value of people over programs.
Yeah, but that's not the core value. All of a sudden I was like, it's
people oriented.
People oriented?
Yeah.
I thought, okay. The core value is people oriented. The tagline that we use to describe it is valuing people over programs. What do we mean by that? What does it mean that we as a church strive to be people oriented?
Well, I mean, it helps to talk about what a program is, right? Like, that's kind of pastor speak.
It is.
Like a program is kind of like an event or a sequential event, like an ongoing event that you would do, whether it's a class or some kind of group meeting or something like that. So for us, our discipleship communities, which formerly known as community groups, are like a program because it's something we do as a whole church where we invite people to attend and do those things. Our Sunday morning services are a program, but a lot of churches have like a lot of other kinds of programs that we don't necessarily have. So they might have midweek meetings. They might have extra Sunday school classes. They might have a whole slew of different kind of ways to serve or minister or learn or read or meet together or do a bunch of different kinds of things. And those would all be programs that the church does. And we actually don't have that many. We have like our foundation classes, our intro class. We have our Sunday services. We have our discipleship communities, cohorts, a few other things that we do kind of regularly that are events or meetings or things you attend and participate in that way. And everything else that we do is try and encourage people to be relational, to like minister to each other and connect to each other via interpersonal relationships, which doesn't mean they can't get together or meet together or have something on a calendar, but it's different than a centralized thing that we put on as the church that we want everyone to participate in. And so when we say we're people oriented and we want to be focusing on people over programs, what we're really trying to do is say we don't want to just be a church that puts on programs that people can attend, and that's our measure of success, is how successful are these programs, how many people are coming, how often can we get someone to the church building or to an event, every week or every month. We want to kind of gauge our success and health as a church in terms of how deep are the relationships? How much are people helping one another grow and build one another up in love? Are those kind of natural, organic relationships that thrive and exist kind of in their own way, or does everything run through like the central planning of the church organization? So that's an opening step.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all of that is true, and I think in our mind, programs are not evil, terrible things. It's not like people over programs as if they're contradictory necessarily, but there can be a temptation for pastors or church leaders or churches to see running the program as the most important thing. So you need to have a bunch of events. And Brian, you were kind of mentioning like this ongoingness, and sometimes it's ongoing, sometimes it's like a program could be like a worship night that you do,
yeah, totally.
like it's just like centralized and structured in a really particular way. And so for pastors, sometimes there can be a temptation to say, I'm going to have an event every night of the week, a different event, a different structure, a different thing, different program we're putting on. It could be a kids program, or it could be an adults program. It could be a mixing program, or whatever, any kind of program. It could be an outreach program. And everything is sort of filtered down into this, I'm running this structure rather than I'm discipling and investing in people. And that's what we're wary of. And not against programs in and of themselves, but we're wary of running a program for the sake of the program rather than an investment in people and their lives in interpersonal ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really helpful, because I think sometimes we can, even in the way we talk about it, sometimes it can sound like we're focused on people versus programs or against programs, but it's really simply an issue of priority, right? Like our focus as the church, the goal is to make disciples, right? The focus is on people. Our task, our mission isn't to put on, to create a structure or put on different events. Our core mission is about the making of disciples and equipping of the body and nurturing people's faith and discipling people into the church. But it's all about people. And so then we want to develop programs, and only those programs that serve the needs of those people, right? And we also then have to limit ourselves, recognizing that we can only do so much, because we can't eat up all of our time putting on programs and not leave time and space for relationships, for investment in the relationships those programs can facilitate.
I think that it's interesting, because for us it's so obvious, but if you're listening and you're kind of like, what do you like, what's the danger here? Like what would be the issue? You could imagine a scenario where, like, let's say you, Scott, in the church, specifically you, not that you have more of a danger. I'm trying to like make it real life, practical.
Are you about to spill like some of my like personal struggles out onto that? That's fine, man. Use me.
You're the practical guy. You know, you want practical, pragmatic. No,
yeah.
but like, let's say on Monday night you have I'm just going to do a Bible study through Acts, and whoever wants to come can come. And then on Tuesday night you have like, you're leading a worship night for anyone who wants to come, and it's like, it's a Tuesday night. And then like Wednesday afternoon you're teaching a different Bible study on Isaiah for anyone who wants an Old Testament Bible study. And then on Thursday you're leading a group that is meant to be, an evangelistic Bible study. And then on Friday you're whatever. And someone might look at that and be like, oh, that sounds great. Like that sounds amazing. But if you do that, there's not space in your life for counseling people when they're struggling and hurting, leadership development and investing in future leaders, relational time with other people in unique ways, developing the staff or helping people in the midst of crisis. It cuts out the ability to invest. Maybe even it prevents you from being out front of your home with your kids and meeting neighbors and connecting with neighbors to, build relationships with non-Christians in your community, in your life, to share the gospel. So when you have so many structures in place. A lot of times people will come to the church and be like, why don't you have more of this? And why don't you have this? And why don't you have this? And why don't you have this? Part of the reason why we're so pared down in that way is because most of the time it's just we're encouraging people, and we ourselves as pastors are trying to spend that time relationally with people in whatever context we're being called to do that.
Yeah, and I think there's implications of that for us as pastors. Like sometimes there are programs that we as a church don't have, because if we did, us as pastors would be spending all of our time putting on programs and wouldn't have time for that interpersonal discipleship for people. But some of the implication is also for just everyone in the church, that we also don't want to offer so many things or encourage you to do so many things that it keeps you from the space and time for those relationships, for those intentional discipleship, disciple building relationships that are at the core of our calling as a church. So I want to ask a couple of questions, because I think for some people that have been around a while, that's probably familiar, right? They've probably heard us talk about this one way or another. And I want to talk maybe specifically to those that have been around a while, but I also want to talk to those that are new, who maybe this hasn't been their church experience before. So, but first, for those that have been around a while, let's say somebody who's been here for 5 or 10 years, somebody that was a part of the church for at least a chunk of time before the pandemic, right? What would you guys want to tell them or remind them about the culture that this core value grows in our, the way that this culture manifests in our midst, and the ways that we hope to see it in this unique season in the life of the church?
I mean, I think if you've been around for a while, you've kind of gotten used to the amount of programs we offer and don't offer. And what maybe has happened, and not for everybody, and this stuff's so fraught because it's kind of like, I don't know, post-pandemic, people, some people are just still exhausted. Some people think they're exhausted when maybe they just think they're exhausted. I don't know, there's so many different things going on right now in different people's lives. But maybe one of the things that's happened, because I know it has happened for me sometimes, is it's easy to forget that the kind of freedom from involvement at church, meaning being on campus like 5 days a week or participating in like as many things as your schedule can possibly allow, that freedom from that is not just freedom from that. It's also freedom to engage in the lives of other people in the church. And so I think it can just be easy to not rest on your laurels, but just kind of go like, man, life feels busy all the time anyway. And I'm just so glad I'm a part of a church that is healthy. And maybe I go to my discipleship community, somewhat regularly, and things are going okay. And I like the services, and like church involvement's pretty great here. I'm so glad I'm not slammed by church involvement. And that's good. But I think the thing that you can lose is that there's a freedom in that freedom, there's a freedom to be intentional in your relationships, to be out in your, in your apartment building or your front yard or whatever, to make those connections, to be intentional with other people in the church and really invest in those relationships, especially your discipleship community outside of the meeting time. Like finding ways to say, my involvement in the church is primarily relationships. So is that actually how I think of my like church community and involvement? Or do I still think of it as, or have I come to think of it as, well, I do the programs the church has, and so I'm involved.
And if the church had more programs, I guess I'd do more.
Yeah, it's just so easy to slip back into that mindset, especially after the pandemic, especially after a lot of crazy things happen. And I want to be very understanding and cautious about like being like, oh, you guys, and I'm not trying to blame people for things, but I also think it's just, we're all prone to that, to think, oh man, I'm really enjoying this freedom and I feel like this church community is home for me, and kind of lose sight of pitching in to the relational part of the church.
I think that's such a huge component of it. And it's really important to remember that the formal aspects of the programs are not the be all end all of what God is calling you to here in your community, in your relationships with brothers and sisters in Christ. you have that space. The reason that space exists in the way that we design those things is for that kind of engagement that God calls you to beyond just participating in a specific event on a specific night.
So I want to put this like the most plain way this thought comes to my head, and you guys can tell me if we need to erase it later. But I want to tell myself and remind myself, and I'm trying to remind myself that we don't do a lower number of programs. We don't try to minimize the formal programs so that you can work 5 extra hours a week. We don't try to minimize the number of programs so that you can put your kids in another sport. Like, we're trying to minimize the number of programs here so that you can fulfill the call on your life to make disciples in our community, to be engaged in the life of the lives of your community and those around you, and the lives of one another in the church family. And so there is a emphasis on investment in the lives of one another that, especially coming out of the difficulty of the last few years, we just don't want to be lost or forgotten because everything else that demands time has ramped back up.
Yeah, and I think it's there's like obviously a line there, right? Like I don't think what you're suggesting is that any of those things are automatically bad if your work is demanding a little extra time from you in one season, or your kids are jumping back into sports because maybe they've never gotten a chance to because of the pandemic. The issue is a question of why is the church structured the way that it's structured? Why are we structured in a way that programs aren't the be all end all of what it looks like to be invested here deeply? And there's a lot of ways that the space that we give purposefully can be seen as an opportunity to do what I want with my life or my time or whatever. And yet at the same time, God still calls you to follow him in all those roles and responsibilities, all those callings he's given you in your community, in your discipleship community, in your neighborhood, in your workplace. All of those things are fulfilling God's call for you in your life in the space that we're trying to give to allow that to happen. And I think, I think about, we talk about discipleship community a lot in this context, but I think about something very specific, okay? Let's talk about one aspect of the Christian life. Let's talk about prayer. Because there's a way that I think sometimes if you think very programmatically, your thought can be, man, I just wish there was like a prayer meeting I could go to that I could pray. Like I think we need to pray more. And there's a prayer, like if there was a formal prayer meeting I could go to, then I could pray more. And what we're trying to tell you is, no, your whole life should be filled with prayer day in, day out, all the time. You don't need a program to pray. If you're saying like, man, I feel like I need more prayer in my life, what I would do is talk to your discipleship community leader or talk to someone in your discipleship community, someone that you know and love, and say, hey, would you come over and I'd love to pray for you. I'd love to hear what's going on in your life and pray for you. Can we pray together about whatever it is? Like, that's you following Christ in your own life with the space that you've been given, because there's not some sort of formal prayer meeting. I guess there's a prayer group that meets before the Sunday services, but like you don't have to wait for some sort of formality to do that. That's why that space is given there, so that you can follow Christ in all those areas of your life, including your time. And
inevitably, there are programs that can help spur us on, right? Sure. In these things. But there's a way in which we can overly rely, right?
We have a Walking with God class that is all about prayer.
Yeah.
That's one of the classes in Walking with God, for example.
So
we also, by the way, say, cutting you off, we also say church getting in the way of church. I was thinking of that phrase that we don't repeat super often, but we used to say a lot more. One of the things we're afraid of is church getting, not afraid of, maybe that's too strong. One of the things we are trying to avoid is this idea of church getting in the way of church, that church is so overscheduled itself with programs that it prevents the members of the church from being the church the way that God has called them to be.
Yeah.
And so that's a phrase that kept coming up in my mind when you guys were sharing.
So what about for someone who is new to Cornerstone, maybe here in the last year, even 2 years, and they're I guess in one sense, it's simpler for someone who maybe doesn't have a church background. Maybe they're new to Christ. This is all they know. But for someone who maybe does have a different church background, maybe they moved here from somewhere else, and their experience from church has been different from this. Their experience from church was more structured, was more programmatic. There were more kind of Bible studies to choose from, and things always going on, and things to attend, and multiple nights a week. What would you want to tell someone who's new, coming from a more programmatic church context?
Well, yeah, in some ways it depends on where they're coming from, but I think for a lot of people, if you come from a church that had a lot of programs, one, I'd say that probably was pretty great for you. Like I just want to really validate, like there's probably a lot of ways that you grew a ton, and a lot of your growth was facilitated by those programs, and we don't want to take a single thing away from that. That's really amazing that God did that, and it's not even despite those programs, maybe it was because of them. Like that's a good thing. I also think that maybe it would make sense to you, having been in a situation like that, how just very subtly you began to think of your involvement in the church as measured by your attendance at programs. And so just kind of really slowly, without even anyone saying it, but simply because there was so much, you were like, kind of, well, yeah, of course I'm involved because I'm at all the stuff, or I'm doing all the different things that they're offering, or a lot of them. And even maybe for pastors, that became the measure of involvement. It was like, let's make sure that we get people to these programs. That's what we do as a church. And so the more people that are there, that's how many people are involved. And so involvement gets measured by like attendance. And here, you're probably going to struggle a little bit because you're not going to be able to feel that involved. Like you might go, man, am I really involved at this church? I go on Sundays and I'm part of this discipleship community. It doesn't feel like I'm really involved. And I just want to tell you, like involvement here means doing those sorts of things and maybe enjoying some of the other programs that we have, classes, things like that. But seeing those things as a way to measure, as a way to facilitate involvement in the lives of other people. And so really that's kind of what we're trying to do here.
So in that sense, going to an equipping class, like Walking in the World, that we would encourage all of you to participate in, going to an equipping class that's not getting connected to the church. That is being equipped so that you can go back to brothers and sisters in Christ in your discipleship community and love them better, serve them better, because you've been equipped with God's word. It's the goal is that relational connection, the relational investment, the interpersonal, the living out the one another's of the New Testament. Really, the goal is the living out the one another's in the New Testament, and the programs may help facilitate that or encourage that or equip you to do that well, but they aren't they aren't what it means to be participating in the church as a whole in a complete way.
Yeah, just by being there, because I do think it's helpful to know that sometimes in the programs themselves, Sunday mornings, if you want to be a part of our kids ministry and you're not there just to like watch kids. Like as a part of that program, you're discipling kids. So there's an interpersonal dynamic in that program built in. Some of them have that. Others are much more equipping focused. We're giving you tools and ways to go use those tools in the lives of other people. And we're trying to give you the space in which to do that so that you'll be able to look at your time at Cornerstone and say, I feel involved because of the depth of relationship I have with other people here, not because of the amount of things I'm doing, at and with the church.
I think for somebody I think that's spot on. And I think for somebody who's new to the church, we're trying to explain this to, one of the things I would say is look around in your discipleship community, in your the people that you know, and spend time with those people. Like as a simple directive, like spend time with those people outside of formal events or meetings. Like go to coffee and hang out with people for dinner, invite people over to your place for dinner. Be proactive relationally is what I would say. Because one of the difficulties that comes from someone with a programmatic background is there can be a passiveness. I don't mean this in a negative way. A passiveness in the sense of everything's centralized and community is structured and facilitated by the central programs of the church. But when you come to a church like ours, where that's not the case, a lot more of it's on you to be proactively reaching out to connect and connecting with people. And some people will come to the church and be like, I don't feel connected to anybody, or we're not meeting enough. I don't see people enough. And I always tell people, look at the people around you that you've made a connection with, call them, invite them over to your place. Say, I'm cooking dinner tonight. I'm whatever. You don't even know how to cook dinner. I'm making mac and cheese. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Like, or let's go to a park and like, you want to go to a park and just walk around. I'm going to the beach today. Invite them into your life. Like, be proactive in trying to build those relationships outside of formal times. And what you're going to see is a kind of close relational connection. And it doesn't always have to be some super spiritual thing. You could just, watch a game, or you could go to a beach, or you could do whatever you want. It's about relationally connecting in a way that you're living out those one another's together and facilitating that relational connection. And what that's going to do is it's going to make those programs that you do participate in so much more meaningful. It's gonna bolster the meaningfulness of those programs, because you're not looking to that program or that event to be the thing that helps you connect. You've already connected outside of those formal events. That's just a unique opportunity to minister together and love one another in a formal context.
Yeah. I think we've talked about actually in the past thinking of like a community group gathering or even a Sunday morning, kind of like family dinner.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a great opportunity. You put it on the calendar, and it's an important opportunity you all prioritize. It's an opportunity to connect. But if the entirety of your relationship the entirety of my relationship with my kids only happened over dinner, right, at those meetings, we would be missing out on what God had designed for the depth of that relationship.
And it doesn't diminish the family dinner.
No.
Family dinner is great and helpful.
The program is a really helpful component of our relationship.
It may be a structure.
A structure that helps support the relationship, but it's not the summary of it.
Yeah. It can't be the beginning, middle, and end of the relationship.
So I know that one of the illustrations we've used in this, and partially because of the book, is the illustration of a trellis and a vine. Do one of you want to just describe that maybe briefly? Because I think especially if you're new and haven't ever heard that, I think it might be another helpful way to picture
Brian's
this.
used it in more sermons, so I think he probably has he could describe what it was like to be on Berkeley Street and in the back patio there was
the kudzu vine, or however you say.
Whatever.
I don't know if I ever said it right.
I know, yeah, probably not.
Yeah, so if you want to grow a vine, you usually put a trellis in. The trellis is what the vine grabs onto.
Trellis is this wooden structure,
crisscross
structure.
Yes, yeah. A wooden structure. Do you want to take this?
No, I thought you would explain it better. Is all. I'm kidding. No, but it's a common word for us.
Vine is this thing. It's typically green. So you have a vine. A trellis is something that is a crisscross wooden structure. You've probably seen it. If you didn't know that's the name of it, that's what it is. And the reason they're put in near vines that are growing is because they allow the vine to grow in a direction. And if a vine doesn't have something to hang on, it kind of just piles up on itself, and that squelches its growth. It can't grow as well because it can't spread out if it has nothing to grab hold of. We use that illustration because A, a vine grows better with a trellis, but B, it would be super weird if someone spent all their time making a really cool trellis while the vine died, like, by not grabbing onto it, you just never water it or something. Like the trellis exists for the vine doesn't exist for the trellis. And in that sense, we try and talk about how essentially the programs of the church exist for the people. The people don't exist for the programs. So it'd be really weird as a church if we treated all of our programs as this really important thing to focus on and polish and really focus on that alone and building those, and not realize they serve a purpose of helping the vine grow, the life of the church, what Matt said, church being church. So that's kind of the illustration we've used historically from a book by Colin Marshall.
Yeah. So
great book. It's probably in our resource library.
Yeah. All right. So maybe one last question then. How does this core value touch down uniquely right now in this moment in the life of our church? Because we've been talking a bit about nurturing a culture, Matt, of
my favorite phrase, nurture the culture. Nurture the culture. I can't even do it. Nurture the culture.
You can do it. You just proved it. Nurturing a culture of intentional discipleship. And it's this intentional discipleship, right? It's really, I think what we're talking about is what fills that space that would otherwise be taken up by attendance or going to programs or things like that, that we sometimes fill with other things, entertainments or activities or whatever, that we've created the space in order for it to be filled with intentional discipleship. So what exactly does that mean, and how does this core value touch down uniquely right now at this moment in the life of the church?
I think there's a couple ways to kind of mine. One is, I think right now, I don't know if it's uniquely difficult, but it's difficult to feel that impetus to go out and really invest in other people. I think that's one of the reasons we're talking about it. I think we feel it too in some ways. A lot of times people come to us as pastors, so there's kind of this initiative that other people take to allow this to happen in our lives sometimes. But we're all like, but we also want to take that initiative in other people's lives. And I think right now, in some ways, it's a lot like, I remember having, when I lived with a bunch of roommates, we were all friends, and then we moved in together. And it was really weird because we lived together, but it felt like we were spending less time with each other. So we almost had to set like date nights as friends to go out and actually cultivate the relationship. There was this kind of, we were constantly doing the same stuff.
That's a better word, cultivate. Cultivate, not nurture. Intentional to cultivate
a culture.
Oh,
see, I can do the same thing with it.
Oh man, go ahead. Cultivate it. Scratch that.
That's helpful. I don't know. I was saying something.
Your roommates, and you had to go.
You had to date night with everyone.
Because you had to be more intentional than you thought you should have to be.
Right.
There was a way that it seemed like everything was set up where this should just happen naturally, and it took a while to notice that it wasn't. And I think for a lot of people right now is that time. Like this season is kind of like looking around going, man, I feel tired. I feel busy. But this should be happening. And on paper, I feel like it like kind of is, but I also know it's kind of not. Like it should be, but it isn't. And I think I need to, this core value touches down in being more intentional and saying like, okay, I have to go cultivate these relationships that God's, whichever ones you're particularly called to, and however many or how that works in your different situations in life, that's the thing that touches down to me. And on top of that, and maybe this is the thing I would say to someone who's new and doesn't have Christian background, is that we essentially, as a church, we are not built to serve and prop up the way of life in West Los Angeles. Like we essentially, we're not against it. We're not like, oh, don't live here. It's horrible. But we're kind of a realistic counterculture to the way life is structured in West LA. And that can be really weird because it seems like church should be something that just kind of fits in with the way life is structured in West LA and never interferes with that. And on the one hand, we're not looking to pretend like everyone's retired and has all the time in the world, or pretend like there aren't the stressors and difficulties and lifestyles that are around us that sort of force certain things. But we're also not looking to just go with the flow and say, yeah, sure, we're just going to live exactly like everyone else in West LA. Like we're realistically countercultural. And one of the main ways that happens is not by attendance, but by the way that we structure our relational lives. And so in that sense, like that kind of intentional discipleship, that intentional cultivation of relationships and depth is the main way that we don't just kind of bow to the structure of life in our city, but try and enter that life and enter that city with a different kind of way of living. And that requires constant negotiation and constant wisdom. But I think it's just important to remember in this particular moment, we are not just living along that same structure and trying to throw a little church in it. We really are trying to be a realistic counterculture here.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful picture of what we're looking to and what I think God calls us to in Scripture to be as a church. And I think it's one of those things that when you think programmatically, I think then you think about discipleship programmatically as well. And what we're describing is something far more organic and relational and interpersonal and woven into your life, I guess. One of the things that the ways I see these two things intersecting in what we're describing in our intentional discipleship is the kind of compartmentalization that I think often happens when it comes to a programmatic kind of thinking that says, Tuesday night at 7 to 9 p.m. that's my like church time, and then Wednesday night is this, and Thursday night, whatever it is. We have all these compartmentalized ideas of what it looks like, and what Scripture describes first and foremost for you as a follower of Christ is you are a part of the church. That's like your identity. You are a child of God connected to the church, and these relationships aren't segmented into certain time slots throughout the week, even though we sometimes think of it that way. Part of what that means, I think, for me, is part of this intentional discipleship is inviting others in your life into the other things that you're doing. So let's say, you have a kid who's starting up a sport or something like that, right? You have a kid who's starting up baseball. It's baseball season starting, and kids baseball is like possibly the worst thing in the history of the world, right? It's just terrible.
Until they turn 10.
I mean, even
it all gets redeemed.
Yeah,
it really does.
We'll see. Okay, I'm not there yet, but
it really does.
Okay, so but one of the things that's fascinating about that is baseball is one of those things that there's just it's like a lot of time, and you're like, man, why is there so much time? What would it look like to invite someone into that with you? Mm-hmm. Like you're in a discipleship community and you have someone that you're connected to. Like invite them to your child's game to watch with you and just spend time. Like what I'm describing is like that compartmentalized idea. We need to abandon that and see these relationships and intentional discipleship as weaving people over programs, people-oriented ministry, philosophy into our lives in a way that's much more comprehensive and less compartmentalized. And so that's one of the things that jumps out to me.
Yeah.
And that is countercultural to our city in so many ways.
That's really helpful. And I think it's probably also helpful to say that like this is what, I mean, in all these years of ministry that we've been doing this, that we've been together, like we're convicted and convinced of this from Scripture, that this is what it looks like to follow Jesus, right? To walk in the way of Jesus in our city. That doesn't mean that we don't struggle to do it. I think that we're trying to lead one another and lead the church towards this, and in some ways back towards it after the last couple of years. But I think that this is something, these are reminders we know that people need because they're reminders we need. I know even all three of us struggle with this and in our families to put that into practice and to not get sucked into the just a standard, just trying to keep up with the way of living in West LA. And I'm not even talking about a standard of living. I'm just talking about like a schedule of living. And it requires a lot of prayer, a lot of wisdom, a lot of conversations to navigate. But at the same time, we believe it's what the Lord has ultimately called all of us to as the church, and therefore possible and worth wrestling with and fighting for.
Yeah. It's a trajectory to pursue.
Yeah.
Not something that we've all arrived at.
I mean, ultimately, we want to value people because God values people in a primary way. Like not in a primary way like that's his ultimate value is just a bunch of humans, like but that's really not something that he has deep down the list on his priorities, if you can even talk about God that way. But like he really and you just read the gospel accounts and watch Jesus, who says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. It's like we're getting a sense of who God is, like through Jesus. He just really values people. And I'm not even saying you have to organize your life exactly like his in the ancient Near East, like today. But just that value of human beings is really important. And to be people who are saying, I want to love God with my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and therefore love my neighbor as myself, is just to say, I want to really care about the people around me and not just be passing them by all the time as I run around my life, but find a way to live today here in a way that shows that value in real, tangible, genuine ways. So I think that's really as much as we're talking about like this as a core value, and that's entirely appropriate, we're really just talking about what it means to love God and trust him and then follow him and have his heart be our heart and his priorities be our priorities, and really call Jesus like our Lord and Master and the one we're following. To follow Jesus is really to say, yeah, I need to grow in my heart for other people the way yours is. And part of that has to be me finding a way to enact that and really engage that in the life I'm living now. And that doesn't need to necessarily look like one particular way of doing things, but it does need to exist. It does need to be a thing that we're all doing. I think that's underneath what a lot of we have been sensing. And I think a lot of us, you listening, have been sensing that you genuinely want more of that. And that the way to do that is some kind of intentional discipleship, some kind of putting people over schedules and over programs and over activities, or weaving that value into those schedules and those activities in a way where you can look at your life and say, there's a million ways to improve, and it still feels difficult and requires a lot of wisdom, but I feel like I'm moving forward in loving and valuing human beings the way that God does. And I can see it and point to places in my life where it exists.
Yeah, and I think it's such a good thought, and it's one of those things where the last thing we would want you to walk away with is, wow, I have a million more things to add onto my already full schedule. It's a question of posture and a question of how do you see your engagement and involvement with the church? The reality is you're probably not going to live an intentional discipleship life with 15 people. It's hard. It's too many people, right? To have those kind of close relational connections, places where you're praying for people and invest, you can confess sin to them. You can talk, like the places where you live out those one another's and bear those burdens. It happens in a limited scale, but it needs to be a part of your life, and it needs to be woven into your life in such a way that you're living out God's call for you here in Los Angeles. It's exactly what he's called you to be and exactly what he's called you to do in the context of the church. And I love that vision, that positive vision of this is what it looks like. This is what loving people looks like. Structuring your life in such a way that allows you to invest and engage in relationships this way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. That's super helpful. That's super, it's interesting even as we talk about it now. I just feel like there's a number of things running through my own mind about my heart and life and choices and things I just want to continue to pray through and strive to follow Jesus more diligently in this season. And as we do, as you guys talk about it, it excites me. It excites me for our church. It excites me for my life. It excites me for my family. It excites me for the ways in which God is drawing all of us forward deeper into both relationships with others and ultimately our relationship with him. So thanks for the time. It was fun hanging out. We should do this more often.
So I'm on thesaurus.com for nurture. I'm looking for something I gotta pursue. No, it doesn't work. Refine. I'm going to think of something. Next podcast we do in 6 months, I'll have a good idea.
Can't wait. Thanks, guys. Thank you all for listening. We love you. We hope you know that, and we can't wait to see you on Sunday.